Here's a very quick summary of Chapter 8 in Women and Development in Africa, How Gender Works. Chapter 8 is about how we measure preferences that families might have, where they prefer sons over daughters, where they give preference and privilege to sons that they don't give to daughters. And we go from the most extreme example of that, where we have skewed sex ratios, to a very difficult question, which is female circumcision. Let me just briefly talk about the sex ratio. The most extreme case, obviously, of where you prefer sons over daughters is where your daughters are not being born, and where you're changing your fertility on the basis of your preference for sons. So we definitely see many countries with differential mortality. We see countries where we have clear evidence that families are practicing the kind of optimal stopping after a son. That is, we have more boys that are the youngest. That is, the youngest sons are more likely to, the youngest children are more likely to be boys. Girls are more likely to be in bigger families, and the intervals after a girl is likely to be shorter than the interval after a boy, with consequent implications for differential breastfeeding. We also, in the chapter, talk about measuring the missing women and counting up how many women are missing. Those kinds of counts don't take into account or don't consider whether the missing women are due to differential births of girls as opposed to boys, and differential mortality at young ages or at older ages, and that's a very interesting issue, with many authors now arguing that while Africa generally doesn't have a missing women problem in early childhood, at least not a significant one, there is a missing women problem at older adult women who are dying much more frequently in Africa than they would in other countries. And we have a digression in the chapter on Emily Oster's hepatitis B hypothesis, which is a fascinating and wonderful episode in the history of the economics and demography of understanding sex ratios and why and how they are skewed. Secondly, we have the conditions of growth of children, and then we have standard measures of the Z-scores of weight and height for children, and some summaries of papers that try and examine whether we can look at weight for age and weight for height of children, stunting, malnourishment, to determine whether there's differential advantage for boys compared with girls. We also look in the chapter at the outlay equivalent ratios that are often constructed in order to measure whether parents, when they have a boy child, are less likely to reduce the consumption that they allocate to that child by instead reducing their own consumption. So parents, if they have a boy child and prefer the boy child, are more likely to reduce their own consumption and thus provide for the child, whereas with a girl child they might be less. At least the preliminary evidence from a number of papers suggests that parents are less likely to reduce their own consumption when they have a girl child. Then lastly, we talk about the issue of female circumcision, which is fraught with issues of culture and what people value, and false consciousness, and gendered norms. So I won't say too much about that right now. One thing we might think about are what are the implications for policy of these differential preferences for sons over daughters as they play out in sex ratios and differential health expenditures and cultural practices like female circumcision. And there are a great many programs that directly address these clear manifestations of gender discrimination, of anti-girl discrimination, and very few of them, however, have been subject to randomized controlled trials to determine whether they are, in fact, effective at resolving the problems that they're intended to resolve. So there's a lot of work still to be done by economists and social scientists generally to try and figure out cost-effective programs for redressing this problem.